Shut up, liar. That was the insult that shattered the silence inside Congress. In a chamber built for order, chaos exploded. Over 320 million Americans were watching, but only two voices mattered. Jasmine Crockett, the fearless warrior for justice, and Donald Trump, the 47th president, fighting like a cornered villain. Across 12 explosive rounds, their words cut deeper than blades. Billions of dollars, decades of power, and the soul of a nation were on the line. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a battlefield. And every second, every word pulled America closer to the edge. Trump leaned forward, his face painted with arrogance, his lips curling into that familiar smirk that millions had come to loathe. His voice cut through the room like a blade dipped in venom. Look at her, Jasmine Crockett, the so-called warrior for justice. He paused just long enough for the cameras to zoom in. She's nothing more than a loudmouth. Another desperate face who thinks shouting can erase the truth of my power. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Some laughed nervously. Others shook their heads in disgust. But all eyes turned to Jasmine. She did not flinch. She did not lower her gaze. Instead, she rose slowly, her hand pressing against the polished wooden desk as if to anchor herself before unleashing a storm. Her voice boomed, raw and unrestrained. Loudmouth! Let me be loud enough to bury your lies once and for all. A wave of murmurs surged through the hall. Every senator, every journalist, every guard froze, waiting for the inevitable collision. Trump chuckled, shaking his head with theatrical disdain. Typical. Another angry woman playing hero. Congress is a place for leaders, not tantrums. The words hit like sparks against gasoline. Jasmine's eyes blazed and her voice cracked open the air. Shut your mouth, Trump. Leaders don't steal, they don't cheat, and they don't poison democracy for their own greed. The chamber erupted. Hands slammed against desks. Some shouted in protest, others in support. The wooden panels of the room groaned under the weight of voices colliding like thunder. Trump's face tightened. His skin flushed crimson as he leaned across the microphone. Careful, Jasmine. You're in the lion's den now, and lions eat rabbits for breakfast. The insult hung in the air, heavy and ugly. But Jasmine fired back without hesitation, her words slicing through the tension. You're no lion, Trump. You're a cornered rat. And today, in front of America, that mask you hide behind is going to fall. The roar from the audience was deafening. Some pounded their fists, others jeered. Security guards exchanged nervous glances, ready to intervene if words turned into more. But it was too late. This was no longer a hearing. It was a war zone. The cameras zoomed in, catching every bead of sweat on Trump's forehead, every spark in Jasmine's unblinking eyes. The duel had begun, and neither was backing down. Trump jabbed his finger toward her, spitting each word like venom. You think you represent justice? Justice doesn't look like you. Justice is strength, and I am strength. The statement dripped with arrogance, but beneath it, there was something else. Fear. Jasmine seized it, twisting the knife deeper. Strength. Strength isn't stealing from the people who trusted you. Strength isn't lying to millions, tearing this country apart while you sit on your golden throne. Her voice rose, shaking the rafters. Strength is standing up to bullies like you. Strength is daring to speak the truth when it's dangerous. That's why I'm here. The audience howled in response. The chamber felt less like a congressional hearing and more like a gladiatorial arena. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. The nation watched, spellbound. Trump bared his teeth, fury twisting his face. You're nothing, Jasmine. A nobody from nowhere. Without me, you wouldn't even be in this room. You should thank me for giving you a stage. Jasmine's reply came like a hammer striking stone. You're right about one thing. I should thank you. Because without your corruption, without your shameless greed, America wouldn't need warriors like me. You built this fight, Trump, and now you're going to lose it. The walls seemed to shake with the collective gasp. The tension was unbearable, electric, impossible to escape. Trump slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The room erupted in chaos, lawmakers shouting, journalists yelling questions, supporters and detractors clashing in a storm of voices. Through the madness, Jasmine stood firm. Her posture was unyielding, her voice calm yet cutting. This isn't your empire, Trump. This is the people's house. And today you answer to them. For a brief moment, silence fell. Every eye locked on Trump. His mouth opened, but no words came. That silence said more than any insult. It was the silence of a man who felt the ground beneath him tremble, and the hearing had only just begun. In moments like these, history isn't just remembered, it's relived. If you want every twist, every clash, every battle for truth brought to life, make sure you're with us on Harrison Stories. Because what comes next, you won't want to miss. Trump leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms wide as if he owned the very air in the chamber. The silence was his cue, and he relished it. You see, this is all a witch hunt, he declared, his voice booming with self-assured swagger. I built this country's greatest economy. I kept America strong. I gave jobs, security, respect. And now these clowns, he jabbed a finger toward Jasmine and her allies, pretend I'm the villain? Please, without me, you'd all be begging on your knees. The chamber groaned with divided voices. Some cheered, others booed, but all leaned closer. Trump's arrogance was the performance of a lifetime. He raised his chin, savoring the cameras. Let me be clear. Every decision I made was for the people. Every dollar spent, every deal signed. I never lied. I never stole. I am the most honest man this building has ever seen. It was a bold claim, reckless even. But Trump thrived on recklessness. He believed if he shouted loudly enough, the truth would bend in his favor. And then Jasmine stood, her chair scraped against the floor, sharp and grating like steel against stone. She looked at Trump not with fear, but with a kind of pity. And when she spoke, her voice cut through his performance like a scalpel. The most honest man this building has ever seen? She let the words hang, dripping with disbelief. Mr. President, let me remind you of something. Your own words, spoken right here, just moments ago. She picked up a sheet of paper, flipping it for dramatic effect, though she hardly needed it. The nation had just heard him. You said, and I quote, I never lied, I never stole. Her tone sharpened. But tell me, sir, what do you call funneling taxpayer money into your private resorts? What do you call pressuring state officials to find votes? What do you call asking a foreign government for dirt on your opponent? The chamber erupted in murmurs, gasps, whispers, heads turning. Trump's smirk faltered, just for an instant. Jasmine didn't give him time to recover. She pressed forward like a boxer who smelled blood. You call yourself the most honest man? History calls you the most indicted. 4 criminal cases, 91 felony counts. And you stand here telling America you're pure as snow? Every number landed like a blow to the ribs. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed with manic urgency. Trump slammed his palm on the desk, his voice rising to drown her out. Fake news, all of it. Lies made up by bitter losers. These so-called charges? They're nothing. They'll disappear just like every other pathetic attack. But Jasmine was relentless. Disappear? No, Mr. President. They multiply. Every time you open your mouth, every time you double down on your arrogance, you give America more proof of who you are. The crowd roared, some clapping, some shouting. The room vibrated with chaos, the sound of democracy on fire. Trump sneered, baring his teeth. You're twisting everything I say. You're desperate, Crockett. Pathetic. Jasmine stepped closer, her voice like thunder. I don't need to twist your words. You twist them yourself. You brag about power. You call corruption strength. You call intimidation leadership. Every time you speak, you testify against yourself. Her words slammed into him with the force of a knockout punch. Trump's face flushed deeper, his hand tightening on the microphone. This is a joke, he shouted, voice cracking. She's a liar, a fraud, a disgrace to this chamber. But the damage was done. The air had shifted. For the first time, Trump wasn't the predator in control. He was the prey thrashing against the ropes. Jasmine held her ground, her tone calm now, almost surgical. You see, Mr. President, the difference between us is simple. You speak to protect yourself. I speak to protect the people. And that is why your words will always collapse under their own weight. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Even Trump's supporters shifted uncomfortably. Because deep down, they knew she was right. The hearing was no longer just words tossed in the wind. It had become a brutal boxing match where every insult was a punch, every statistic a body blow, and every truth a strike aimed straight at the heart of power. And the first round had gone to Jasmine Crockett. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not even close. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Trump like a predator ready for the final strike. Her voice was steady, but every word carried the weight of dynamite. "Let's talk about what you've tried to bury, Mr. President," she began. "Let's talk about the secrets you've hidden behind walls of money, threats, and lawyers." The room tensed. It was the shift everyone felt, the sense that the battle was about to break through the surface and plunge into dangerous depths. Jasmine raised her hand, ticking off each point like the clicking of a time bomb. 1. The payments to silence women during your campaign. You called them nuisances. America calls them hush money. Trump's jaw tightened. He shook his head violently. Lies, personal matters, nothing to do with politics. But Jasmine pressed on. 2. The classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. You called it your personal library. The law calls it a federal crime. The chamber shook with gas, half in outrage, half in glee. Every sentence was a blade cutting deeper into Trump's armor. 3. Jasmine's voice sharpened. The phone calls to Georgia. Your words, Mr. President. Find me 11,680 votes. That's not leadership. That's election theft in plain sight. Trump slammed his fists against the table. You twisted that call. Everyone knows it. That was about fairness, not stealing. But his voice cracked under the pressure, and the chamber knew it. For once, the mighty Donald Trump sounded cornered. Jasmine stepped closer, her finger pointed like an arrow to his chest. 4. Your charity shut down because it was nothing more than a piggy bank for your personal greed. Tell me, Mr. President, do you even remember what honesty looks like? The chamber exploded. Reporters nearly fell out of their seats, scribbling, recording, capturing every second of the meltdown. Trump shot up from his chair, his face red, his voice a roar. You dare attack me like this? You, a nobody, a low-life leech clinging to my name for fame. You're pathetic, Crockett, pathetic. His finger jabbed toward her like a weapon. She's a disgrace. She hates America. She's nothing but a radical puppet, spewing poison against the greatest president this country has ever had. The words struck with venom, each insult designed to shred her dignity. Some in the chamber cheered, banging their fists on the desks, echoing his fury. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her lips curled into a smile, not of amusement, but of defiance. Is that all you've got? She shot back, her voice calm against his rage. Name-calling? Screaming like a spoiled child who finally got caught? You can insult me all you want, but you can't erase the truth. The crowd erupted again, some standing, some shouting, the noise swelling like a wave about to swallow the entire chamber. It wasn't just debate anymore. It was war, fought with spit, fire, and words sharpened into blades. Trump's voice grew louder, shriller. You're corrupt. You're weak. You're a traitor to this nation. You don't belong here, Jasmine Crockett. You belong in prison. He pounded the desk again, the sound reverberating like gunfire. Security guards shifted uneasily at the edges of the room, hands near their earpieces, their bodies tense. One wrong move, one flying object, and they would have to step in. Jasmine raised her hand, silencing the chaos with nothing but presence. Her voice dropped lower, steady and cutting, like a blade drawn slow. I don't belong in prison, Mr. President, but you belong in history's darkest chapters, right next to every tyrant who thought they could twist power into a crown. America sees through you, and no tantrum, no insult, no scream will ever change that. The silence that followed was electric, charged with the tension of 1,000 storms. Even Trump's supporters shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting, their confidence cracking. Trump, shaking with rage, bellowed once more. You'll regret this, Crockett. I'll bury you. I'll crush you. But his threats sounded hollow now, like the flailing of a man swinging in the dark. And Jasmine, calm, resolute, stood tall, her shadow stretching across the chamber like a shield. The hearing was no longer a debate. It was a battlefield, and the air smelled of powder, sweat, and the inevitability of an explosion. Security inched forward, ready to intervene, because everyone in that room knew. The storm had only just begun, and then Jasmine struck. Without a word, she reached for the remote resting on her desk. A single click. The lights dimmed, screens flickered, and suddenly the chamber's giant monitors lit up with footage no one expected to see. The video rolled. Trump's voice filled the air, not from the podium, but from the past. Just say the votes were corrupt and leave the rest to me. The recording was sharp, undeniable. A phone call. Trump's voice, his tone, his words. The chamber froze in collective disbelief. Reporters gasped aloud. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, some covering their mouths, others leaning forward as if dragged by gravity toward the screens. The camera feed caught every angle of the room, eyes widening, brows furrowing, lips pressed tight in unease. The nation was watching in real time as history unspooled itself, frame by damning frame. Trump jolted upright, his hand slammed against the desk. "This is garbage, fabricated trash," he roared, his face blotched crimson with fury. "This is the work of traitors, of sick, demented liars. You're playing doctored tapes, Crockett. You're a dangerous liar." His words echoed, spittle flying under the chamber lights. But the footage kept rolling. Unstoppable, undeniable. Another clip. Trump's voice again, on a stage this time. "If they hit you, hit back 10 times harder. If the law says no, you push until it breaks. Power doesn't wait. It takes." The crowd inside the chamber erupted. Some shouted in rage. Others cheered at the exposure. The sound was thunder, chaotic, violent. Jasmine remained calm, standing tall at her podium. Her eyes glimmered, not with anger, but with certainty. She let the noise swell, then cut through it with a single sentence. "You can scream fake 1,000 times, Mr. President, but the truth doesn't need your permission to exist." Her tone was icy, slicing through Trump's fury like a blade through silk. Trump lunged forward, his voice breaking into a scream. "You're a fraud, a disgrace. You should be thrown out of this chamber for even daring to show this filth." He pounded the desk again, the sound reverberating like gunfire. Security edged closer, tension buzzing like static electricity in the air. But Jasmine only smiled. Slow, deliberate, razor sharp. "That pounding sound," she said softly, leaning into the microphone. "That's not strength. That's fear." Trump froze, his mouth half open, his fury momentarily suspended. "You're terrified," Jasmine continued, her voice steady as a storm's eye. "Terrified that the country you thought you could manipulate is finally seeing you for what you are. Terrified that your empire of lies is crumbling, piece by piece, clip by clip, truth by truth." The monitors behind her flicked to another freeze frame, Trump's hand reaching for a phone, his words captioned in bold across the screen. The room went silent, not because the storm had passed, but because its eye had arrived. Everyone was staring, watching, absorbing. And Jasmine stood there, untouched by the chaos, her presence electric. Trump broke the silence with a guttural shout. "You won't win! You can't win! America's with me, not you!" Jasmine tilted her head, her smile curving into one of cold defiance. "If America is truly with you, Mr. President, why do they need to hear this tape to know the truth?" Her words fell like stones into a still pond, the ripples reaching every corner of the chamber, every living room across the nation where millions were glued to their screens. Trump's chest heaved, his fist shook. He looked less like a president, more like a cornered man, thrashing, desperate, unraveling before the eyes of history. And Jasmine, her voice calm as steel, landed the final blow of the round. "The truth doesn't tremble. Only liars do." The chamber erupted again, this time not just in chaos, but in recognition. It was clear who was steering the storm now. And as the nation held its breath, Jasmine's voice carried over the roar with a quiet clarity that cut through the noise like light through shadow. If you believe America deserves the truth, if you believe justice matters, then let your voice be heard. Support the stories that dare to reveal what others hide. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, because this fight is only beginning. The words still hung in the charged air when the chamber detonated. A senator in a dark suit leapt to his feet, pointing straight at Jasmine. "This is outrageous. You're weaponizing lies against the President of the United States." Another rose beside him, fists pounding on the table. "Shut her mic off. This is not a hearing. It's a witch trial." The Trump camp had entered the battlefield. From the opposite side, voices of dissent rang out. "Sit down, you hypocrites. You've defended corruption long enough. America deserves to see the truth. Let her speak." It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a war zone of words, a collision of thunderclaps inside four marble walls. The speaker's gavel slammed against wood again and again, but the pounding was drowned out by the shouting. Every side shouted louder than the last, each voice clawing to dominate. Through the storm, Jasmine stood, unmoving, unbroken. When one senator tried to drown her out with chants of "lies, lies, lies," she stepped closer to the mic, lifted her chin, and thundered back louder. "You can yell until your throats bleed, but you cannot bury the truth." Her voice rose above the cacophony, not shrill but commanding. It rolled through the chamber like a battle horn, cutting through the clamor and forcing heads to turn. The pro-Trump faction wasn't finished. One of them jabbed a finger across the aisle. "You're grandstanding, Crockett. This is all for cameras, all for your own ego. You're making a mockery of this institution." Jasmine snapped her head toward him, her eyes ablaze. "You dare talk about mockery? A man who tried to overthrow democracy stands here pretending to be a saint, and you protect him? That is the mockery." The room trembled. Every exchange was a clash of steel, every insult a spark setting, dry kindling a flame. More senators joined the fray, shouting across desks, their words colliding midair like cannon fire. "This is treason against a sitting president. No, treason is betraying your country for personal gain." The chamber's marble walls seemed to close in, every word ricocheting, building into a chaos that threatened to burst. Through it all, Trump leaned back, smirking, letting his allies do the heavy lifting. But Jasmine saw it. She saw the cowardice behind the smirk, the man hiding behind the pack of wolves. She lifted her hand again, waiting. The crowd didn't quiet. So she roared. "Enough!" The word ripped through the chamber like a lightning strike. Even her opponents froze, if only for a moment. And in that silence, Jasmine seized the floor. "You think I'm one voice? You think I'm standing here alone? Look outside these walls. Millions of Americans are watching. Millions who have been silenced, cheated, and ignored. I am their voice, and no amount of screaming from you will erase that." The words burned, seared into the chamber's very air. She was one woman, yes. But in that instant, she felt like an army. The Trump allies scrambled to regain the momentum. One senator bellowed, "You're nothing but a radical fraud, Crockett. You have no honor, no place here." Jasmine fired back instantly, her tone laced with venom and fire. "And you, sir, are nothing but a shield for a tyrant, too afraid to face the truth because it might cost you your seat." The chamber shook again, security on edge, reporters snapping pictures like gunfire. It wasn't politics anymore. It was raw survival of voices, a battle of lungs and willpower. Trump finally rose, arms stretched wide, trying to seize the spotlight. "Look at her, screaming like a lunatic, disrespecting the presidency, disrespecting this chamber. She's not a warrior. She's a disgrace." But Jasmine turned toward him, her smile carved with defiance. "A disgrace is a man who hides behind his allies because he's too afraid to face one woman head-on." The line landed like a thunderbolt. Even those who had cheered Trump faltered, their eyes flicking between him and her, caught in the gravitational pull of her courage. The chaos swelled again. Two armies locked in verbal combat, fists pounding, voices breaking, veins straining. And in the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her voice cutting through the mayhem, her presence unshakable. One warrior, one voice, against a pack of wolves. And still she refused to break. Trump watched her, chest heaving, fists trembling. And then, Suddenly, he stopped. The smirk returned. But this time it wasn't bluster, it was something else. A mask. He raised his hands, palms outward, and spoke in a voice so uncharacteristically soft that even his allies fell silent. "Enough," he said, measured, deliberate. "Enough of this shouting match. We're leaders. We're supposed to set an example for the nation, not tear each other apart like children." The shift was jarring. The once bellowing Trump now spoke like a weary statesman, sighing as though the burden of democracy rested on his shoulders. The chamber leaned in, unsure, suspicious, caught in the dissonance. He straightened his jacket, lowered his tone even further, almost gentle. "Congresswoman Crockett, I respect your passion. Truly I do. You fight hard, you speak loudly, and that's admirable. But you're letting anger guide you. And anger blinds us all." His eyes locked on her, piercing, calculating. It was no longer brute force. It was seduction, an attempt to disarm, to pull her into the illusion of civility. "I have no fear of the truth," Trump continued, spreading his arms as if inviting judgment. "I only fear what happens when the truth gets twisted by ambition. And right now, that's exactly what you're doing. You're twisting. You're misleading. You're dividing America, not saving it." The words dripped with feigned sincerity, a performance designed to lull the chamber, to paint himself as the adult in the room while casting Jasmine as the reckless child. Some senators nodded cautiously. Reporters glanced at one another. The trap was working. Jasmine felt it. The pull of his act, the way his calmness sucked the oxygen out of the firestorm she had created. It was a maneuver, old as politics itself. Let the opponent rage, then play the martyr. But Jasmine was no rookie. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, eyes narrowed, her smile razor sharp. "Mr. President," she said slowly, her voice like a taut wire ready to snap. That was almost convincing. The chamber shifted again. She had seen through the mask. "You call my fight anger? You call my fire a weakness?" "No, it is clarity. It is conviction. And do you know why? Because I don't have to pretend." Her words landed with surgical precision. Trump's smile twitched, the mask beginning to slip. "You talk about truth being twisted, but let's look closer at your so-called humility." She gestured to the screen still frozen behind her. Trump's own damning words captured for eternity. "Every time you've been caught, every time evidence cornered you, you do the same thing. You soften your voice. You spread your hands. You say, 'I respect you. I admire you.' You call yourself the victim. And then, when you think the room believes it, you strike." The crowd rumbled, a nervous energy rising once again. Jasmine stepped closer, her voice rising in pitch, in fire, in undeniability. "You call this respect? Respect is not silencing women with money. Respect is not bullying officials to invent votes. Respect is not hoarding secrets in your basement. Respect, Mr. President, is telling the truth even when it costs you everything. And you have never done that a single day in your life." The chamber erupted. Some slammed their fists in agreement. Others shouted in fury. Trump's mask shattered. "You arrogant, self-righteous liar," he roared, slamming the desk with such force that papers scattered. "You stand there on your little pedestal, pretending to be pure when you're nothing but a disgrace. You're dangerous. You're tearing this country apart." His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through the rage. Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned into the microphone, her words a whip across his fury. "No, Mr. President, I'm not tearing America apart. I'm tearing the mask off the man who already did." So, the room exploded. Cheers, jeers, screams colliding into a single deafening roar. Reporters shouted into microphones, cameras flashing like lightning as the two voices clashed like thunder. It was no longer a debate. It was a duel. Trump towered, shouting, fists clenched, veins bulging. Jasmine stood tall, her voice unwavering, slicing through his rage like steel against flesh. A battle of two voices, a battle of two truths. But only one rang with conviction. And the chamber, the nation, the world could feel it. The storm was no longer outside. It was here, in the very heart of America's democracy, and the fire was spreading. What began as sparks had become a storm, words flung like knives, voices no longer speeches but weapons. Trump leaned across the table, jabbing a finger at Jasmine so close it nearly brushed her face. "You're nothing. Nothing but a loudmouth fraud who doesn't understand the first thing about power." Jasmine slapped his hand away, eyes blazing. "You think power is lying, bullying, and cheating your way through life? That's not power. That's cowardice wrapped in arrogance." The chamber erupted again, staffers rushing to hold back furious senators who shouted over one another. But Trump and Jasmine were locked in their own orbit, voices colliding, louder, harsher, sharper. "You're dangerous," Trump bellowed. "You're weak," Jasmine snapped back. "You're destroying America." "No, you already did." The words tangled into chaos, a duel without restraint, their faces inches apart, spit flying, fists pounding, veins bursting. The air itself seemed to shake. Then it happened. The slip. Trump's face purpled with fury, and in a moment of blind rage he barked, "Of course I told them to stall the ballots. I had to, or else I'd lose everything." The room froze. The words hung heavy, suspended in the stunned silence. Even the cameras seemed to pause, their red lights blinking like unblinking eyes. Trump's expression flickered. Realization, dread, then a quick attempt to cover. "I mean, that's not what I said. You're twisting my words." But it was too late. The storm had cracked open the sky. Jasmine straightened, her expression transforming into something sharp, triumphant. Her voice cut through the stunned chamber like a blade. "Say that again," she demanded, every syllable steady, lethal. "Tell this chamber, tell America, that you ordered ballots to be stalled, that you manipulated the election because you were terrified of losing." Trump shook his head violently, hands raised, palms sweating. "I didn't. I never said that." But Jasmine pounced, refusing to let the moment slip away. Her voice rose, fueled by fire, by destiny. "You just confessed on record in front of the entire nation," she thundered. "You admit you tampered with the democratic process. You admit you placed yourself above the will of the people. And you admit, finally, that you fear the truth more than anything else in this world." The gallery gasped. Journalists erupted, typing furiously, cameras flashing like lightning against the dark storm of the chamber. Trump tried to shout over her, but his words stumbled, tripping over his own desperation. "You're twisting it. You don't understand. I was protecting the system." "Protecting?" Jasmine's laughter was sharp, scathing. "You call it protecting when you choke democracy to keep yourself in power? That's not protection. That's betrayal." The chamber shook with noise. Lawmakers shouting, some demanding order, others chanting for accountability. Security shifted nervously, ready to intervene, but the duel raged on. Jasmine pointed at him, her voice now thunder, now fire, now the strike of judgment itself. "America just heard you. No editing, no spin. Your words raw and unfiltered. This is the coffin nail you can't escape, the truth you can't bury, the moment history will never forget." Trump's face collapsed into fury, but behind the anger, fear, the fear of a man who realized his mask had shattered, his secret exposed, his empire cracking. "You will regret this," he screamed, pounding the desk so violently that microphones rattled. "You and your lies will burn with you." But Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward, whispering into the microphone with a calmness that sliced sharper than any scream. "No, Mr. President, the only thing burning here is your illusion of untouchable power." The chamber exploded. Cheers, jeers, fists slamming, voices rising into a single cacophonous roar. Some shouted for justice, others shouted for silence. But no one could unhear what had just been said. Trump had confessed, and Jasmine had turned his fury into his downfall. The tempest had reached its peak, and the world was watching, breathless. And somewhere beyond the roar, beyond the flashing cameras and trembling walls, one truth had become undeniable. The fight was no longer about survival, it was about destiny. And Jasmine Crockett had prepared for this moment. With steady hands, she reached into her folder and drew out a slim envelope sealed with a red stamp. The room hushed as if sensing the weight of what she held. She raised it high, her voice sharp as a gavel. These, she declared, are declassified documents obtained through legal channels. Documents that reveal the truth Donald Trump has spent years burying. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Even the loudest voices fell silent, eyes fixed on the envelope like it contained a bomb ready to detonate. Jasmine slid the papers free and placed them on the table. Under the glare of the cameras, the ink shone dark, undeniable. Internal communications, she said, her voice cold. Records of orders, signatures, dates. They showed deliberate attempts to obstruct the electoral process, to manipulate the very system meant to protect the people's voice. Trump lurched forward, his chair screeching against the marble floor. "That's fake! It's fabricated trash!" he roared, his face a storm of rage. "Another witch hunt! Another pile of lies!" But Jasmine didn't even flinch. She spread the documents wide so every senator, every journalist, every pair of eyes in the gallery could see. "No, Mr. Trump, these are your words, your directives, your fingerprints all over the machinery of deceit, and unlike your speeches, paper does not lie." The room erupted into a low hum, shock, whispers, the scratching of pens, the clicking of cameras. It was no longer debate, it was evidence. Trump staggered back a step, his bravado cracking. Still, he fought to cling to the remnants of power. "This is treason," he screamed. "You're the criminal here. You and your friends cooked this up. This is a setup, a smear." His words bounced, desperate, hollow. They were no longer blows, just echoes. Jasmine pressed on, her voice steady, relentless. "You've called this a witch hunt for years. But witches don't write memos. Witches don't sign directives. And witches don't order ballots to be stalled in their own handwriting." The gallery roared, some laughing bitterly, others shouting for order. It was chaos, but it was chaos tilting in Jasmine's favor. Trump slammed his fist down, shaking the microphones. "You're a liar, a dangerous liar. You'll destroy this country if people listen to you." But Jasmine leaned closer, her eyes sharp, her tone almost surgical. "No, Mr. Trump, I'm not destroying anything. I'm revealing it. You've built a kingdom of shadows. Today the lights are on." Her words cut deeper than any insult. They weren't just attacks, they were verdicts. Each sentence landed like a blade against the myth Trump had crafted around himself. Around them, the chamber no longer resembled a hearing. It had transformed into a trial, public, raw, immediate. The senators were no longer colleagues, they were jurors. The journalists were no longer observers, they were witnesses. And the American people, glued to their screens, had become the ultimate judge. Trump tried to rally one last strike. "You think anyone believes you? You think anyone cares? I built this country stronger than anyone else. I made America great again. And you're just tearing it down." But Jasmine didn't blink. Her reply was as calm as it was devastating. "Greatness built on lies isn't greatness. It's rot, and rot always collapses under its own weight." Her words echoed, a hammer striking the coffin closed. Trump's face twisted, his fury boiling into incoherent shouts, insults, curses, half-formed defenses. But they only made him look smaller, weaker, cornered. Jasmine stood taller, her presence expanding to fill the chamber. Every eye was on her, every ear bent to her words, and with every sentence, she drove the nail deeper, slicing away at the illusion of Trump's untouchability. The room quaked not with fear, but with revelation. The truth had been dragged into the light, undeniable, unshakable. And as Trump flailed, Jasmine's voice sealed the moment. "This isn't my judgment, Mr. Trump. This is yours, written by your own hand, preserved in your own records, and now seen by the entire nation." The chamber fell into stunned silence. It was the silence of realization, of witnesses who understood they had just seen the veil ripped away. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. And it was swallowing Donald Trump whole. But Trump was not a man who surrendered easily. Even as the walls pressed in, he found a crack of light, a space to twist his voice into something larger than truth. He leaned forward, hands gripping the table, his tone shifting from rage to firebrand certainty. "Look at her," he thundered, pointing at Jasmine with the venom of a cornered animal. "She waves papers around and calls them proof. But you know what this really is? A performance, a sham, another desperate stunt to silence millions of Americans who voted for me. The words cut through the air like a siren. Some senators nodded, their expressions stiff, as if Trump had rekindled an old loyalty. Reporters in the gallery scribbled furiously, their headlines already forming. And beyond the chamber, in living rooms across America, echoes of doubt began to stir. Could Jasmine be exaggerating? Was this really truth, or just another battle in an endless war of politics? Trump saw the shift and pounced. "You want to talk about lies?" he barked, voice booming louder with each phrase. "She lied about me before. She lied about all of you. And now she lies to the American people. Because the truth is this: if I fall, you all fall with me." Sudden, the chamber erupted. Cheers, boos, pounding fists on desks. A senator stood and shouted in agreement. Another barked back, calling Trump's words poison. The room fractured into chaos, two armies forming on the same battlefield. For the first time, Jasmine felt the ground beneath her sway, not from lack of conviction, but from the sheer force of Trump's manipulation. He was a master at bending fear into allegiance, twisting insecurity into loyalty. Her heart pounded. She could feel eyes shifting, could hear the whispers of doubt circling like vultures. For a moment, a fleeting second, she wondered if the tide was slipping away. Trump sensed it too. He leaned back with a smirk, raising his arms like a conquering general. "They know. They see through you, Jasmine Crockett. The American people will never believe your lies because I am their voice." The words struck like a hammer. Some in the gallery clapped, others jeered, but the noise was loud enough, disorienting enough, that it threatened to drown out Jasmine's truth. She stood frozen for a breath, her pulse racing, her mind searching. And then, like lightning breaking through storm clouds, clarity struck. She slammed her hand on the table so hard the microphones rattled. "Enough!" she roared, her voice carrying above the chaos. The chamber froze, every head whipping back toward her. "You call this truth?" she spat, pointing directly at Trump. "This circus? This smoke and mirrors? You stand here screaming about loyalty while every piece of evidence shows betrayal. You talk about millions of Americans, but the only person you fight for is yourself." The gallery stirred again, but this time the rhythm shifted. Her fury was electric, raw, undeniable. Trump tried to cut in, "Liar! Dangerous liar!" But she bulldozed over his words, her volume rising with every sentence. "You say I'm performing? Damn right I am. I'm performing the duty every American expects. To call a criminal what he is. To drag his lies into the light. And no matter how loud you shout, Mr. Trump, you can't shout down the truth." Her words cracked through the chamber like thunder. Applause burst from one corner, then another. Even those who had wavered felt the pull of her conviction, the gravity of her refusal to bow. Trump's smirk faltered, his rhythm broken. He raised his hand as if to strike with another barrage. But Jasmine cut in once more, sharp, unrelenting. "You think volume makes you right? You think anger makes you innocent? No, they make you desperate. And desperation is what everyone here sees right now." The air tightened. Reporters leaned forward, pens flying. The senators who had wavered moments before sat stiff again, some shifting uncomfortably under the weight of her words. Jasmine's voice dropped, low and precise. "Every scream, every insult, every false claim, you're not winning them over. You're proving my point. You're proving you're terrified of the evidence, terrified of me, terrified of the truth." Her eyes locked on his, unflinching, unyielding. And in that silence that followed, the pendulum swung back. The gallery erupted. Applause, cheers. The pounding of fists, not in anger, but in support. The chamber shook with renewed energy, the air heavy with the sense that Jasmine had not only survived Trump's gambit, but had crushed it. Trump fumed, his chest heaving, his face red, the veneer of control slipping like sand through his fingers. And Jasmine, standing tall, let the moment breathe before delivering the strike that sealed the round. "You can twist words, but you can't twist reality. And reality is standing right here, staring you in the face." The chamber thundered, voices roaring in her favor. The tide was hers again. And for the first time that day, Trump looked not like a fighter, but like a man running out of ground to stand on. Jasmine Crockett didn't let the silence linger. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the sharpness of a blade that had been waiting for its moment. You've called every document fake. You've mocked every word as lies. But what will you call this? The doors at the back of the chamber creaked open. Every head turned. Every camera swung in unison. A figure stepped inside, slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. It wasn't another stack of papers. It wasn't another video. It was flesh and blood. A living witness. Gasps rippled through the hall like an earthquake. Some senators shot to their feet. Others sat frozen, wide-eyed. Reporters scrambled, lenses zooming, fingers hammering keyboards. Trump's face drained of color, then flushed crimson as recognition hit him. He jolted upright, slamming his palms onto the desk so hard the microphone squealed. "No!" he barked, voice trembling with fury. "This is a setup, a goddamn circus. That person doesn't belong here." But the witness kept walking forward, their steps echoing on the marble floor like a drumbeat of judgment. Each step was a nail in Trump's coffin. Jasmine's voice sliced through the uproar. "Mr. Trump, meet the one thing you can't shout down, the one thing you can't bury with insults. Meet the truth, alive and undeniable." Trump's chest heaved as he fought to reclaim the room. His voice rose higher, louder, desperate to reassert control. "This is illegal. I was president of the United States. You don't bring in some random nobody to smear me in front of the world. I'm the most powerful man here. Do you hear me? The most powerful man." He shouted like a king stripped of his crown, clinging to the last threads of authority. His words bounced, echoed, but they no longer commanded. The chamber didn't quake with fear this time. It shook with anticipation. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She rose, her voice exploding with the fury of a nation wronged. "Power? Your power is gone. Respect? You burned it to ashes. And now, before this Congress, before this country, the truth will not bow to you." Trump tried to shout over her, his voice ragged, cracking under the strain. But she roared louder, every syllable a hammer driving the final nail. "The truth has stood here, patient, waiting for its moment. And that moment is now. The truth has won, Donald Trump. It has beaten you. It has crushed you. It has ended you." The chamber exploded. Applause thundered like cannon fire. Senators pounding their desks, reporters yelling into phones, the gallery screaming in disbelief and exhilaration. It was chaos, but chaos drenched in victory. Trump's face contorted, his body trembling with rage. He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, his voice shattering into a scream. "You dangerous liar! You think this is over? You think you can humiliate me like this? You will regret this, every last one of you." But his voice was drowned out, smothered under the roar of the room. No one leaned in to hear him now. No one hung on his words. The spotlight that had once belonged to him had shifted, permanently, irrevocably, to Jasmine Crockett. She stood firm, her chest rising and falling, her glare locked on him like a warrior who had just slain a beast. Her voice dropped, low but piercing enough to cut through the noise. "You've lived off fear and lies for too long, but today in this chamber, in front of the people, you've been stripped bare, and no crown, no title, no scream can cover you now." The witness reached the center of the floor, ready to speak, ready to seal Trump's fate with words no rhetoric could undo. And Jasmine, with the weight of the entire moment pressing down, delivered the final strike. "The truth has defeated you." The chamber erupted once more, a wave of sound so overwhelming it shook the walls, the rafters, the very air itself. And in that maelstrom of fury and triumph, Donald Trump, once untouchable, looked smaller than ever before. The finishing blow had landed, and everyone in America knew it. Trump stood frozen, as though the very air had betrayed him. The man who once commanded arenas with a flick of his wrist now looked like a hollow statue, chipped, cracked, and ready to crumble. His tie dangled, his jaw quivered, his hands twitched at the edge of the desk. For years he had built his fortress out of bluster, slogans, and showmanship. But now that fortress lay in ruins. Every brick had been torn down, every facade shattered. The cameras that had once adored him no longer softened their gaze. They lingered cruelly, exposing the sweat on his brow, the wild darting of his eyes, the way his chest heaved in panic. The illusion was gone, and with it, so was his power. The chamber was eerily unified. Even those who had wavered, those who had clung to neutrality, those who had played both sides for safety, were now peeling away. One by one, they turned their shoulders, their silence louder than any scream. Trump reached for them with words. "I built this country. I gave you jobs. I gave you power. You're nothing without me." But the words fell flat. They didn't soar. They didn't command. They landed like broken glass, sharp but useless, scattered at his feet. The senators who had once cheered him now fixed him with eyes of contempt. Some whispered among themselves, some shook their heads. Others simply stared with that cruel, heavy look, pity wrapped in disgust. It was the look reserved for a fallen king. A man who once terrified them, now rendered powerless by the truth. And then the gallery rose. First a murmur, then a chant, swelling, thunderous, impossible to ignore. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" The word rolled like a wave, cresting higher, smashing against the walls of the chamber, rattling the air itself. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center of it all, shoulders back, head high, her face illuminated not just by the lights, but by the fire in her stance. She was no longer just a congresswoman battling Trump. She was the embodiment of defiance, the voice of every silenced truth finally unleashed. Trump tried to shout over the chant, his voice cracking, desperate, clawing at the last remnants of relevance. "This isn't justice. This is tyranny. You're all frauds, every last one of you. I will destroy you." But his screams were drowned in the storm. No one leaned forward anymore. No one listened. The chamber had chosen, the country had chosen, and Jasmine was their beacon. She raised her hand, and for a moment the chant softened, the air trembling with anticipation. Her voice, steady and searing, rang out. For too long, this nation was held hostage by fear. For too long, lies masqueraded as truth. But today, here, before this body and before the people, justice has spoken, and justice has won. The room erupted again, chants swelling, fists pounding the air, feet stomping the floor until the marble quaked. "Justice! Justice!" Trump staggered back, his chair screeching against the ground. He looked smaller than he had ever looked, like a shadow retreating from the light. His eyes darted for an escape, for an ally, for anything at all. But there was nothing left, only walls, only eyes, only judgment. His power didn't just crack that day. It collapsed, not with the bang of triumph, but with the hollow echo of abandonment. Jasmine remained where she was, the chant lifting her higher, the sound of history itself carrying her words into the bloodstream of the nation. "Justice!" the crowd roared, and she stood, proud, immovable, a pillar of truth in the ruins of Trump's empire. The fall was complete, and America watched, unblinking, as the mighty finally fell. Yet the silence that followed was not relief. It was weight, a heavy, suffocating stillness that settled over the chamber like ash after a fire. The gavel struck. Once, twice. The sound reverberated across the hall, sharp and metallic, marking the end of the hearing, but not the end of the storm. Trump's chair screeched as he shoved it back. He rose with the stiffness of a man carrying centuries of rage. His face was crimson, his lips trembling, his eyes ablaze with fury barely contained. The cameras caught every frame, the sweat clinging to his forehead, the way his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned bone white, the way his jaw locked as though he might crack his own teeth. He didn't look at Jasmine, not directly. Instead, he let his glare sweep the room, searing each senator, each journalist, each spectator, as if carving their betrayal into memory. When he finally spoke, his voice was jagged, venomous, dripping with bitterness. "You think this is over? You think you've beaten me? This," he spat the word, "is just the beginning, and I will burn every last one of you down." Gasps rippled through the room, but Trump didn't stay to hear them. He turned, shoulders rigid, and stormed toward the exit. The cameras followed him like vultures stalking a wounded beast. Every step was heavy, not with strength, but with defeat. His once commanding stride now looked more like a march of exile, the ground beneath him cracking with every stomp. And when the doors finally slammed shut behind him, it echoed like the lid of a coffin. The chamber exhaled, a breath it hadn't realized it was holding. Jasmine remained standing. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood, strong, unmoved, like a monument that would not be toppled. Her name surged across whispers, then headlines, then chants outside the chamber. Jasmine Crockett, a name now etched into history, carved into the nation's consciousness as the embodiment of defiance. The crowd outside had been waiting. When word spread of the collapse inside, the roar outside the Capitol swelled into a quake. Justice! Justice! The sound rose, spread, multiplied, until it rolled through the streets of Washington like thunder. Jasmine walked out into it. The cameras followed her too, but not like they followed Trump. They didn't stalk her, they crowned her. Every lens, every microphone, every voice wanted only one thing: to capture the fire she carried. She raised her hand and the crowd erupted. Tears streaked faces. Fists punched the air. Voices cracked from shouting but refused to stop. She had become more than a congresswoman, more than a fighter. She was now a symbol, a living, breathing strike of lightning against the dark. And yet, behind the roar, behind the chants, behind the triumphant echo of justice, there lingered something else, a shadow. Because Trump had not vanished. He had not surrendered. He had retreated, yes, but retreat was not the same as defeat. Even as Jasmine stood in victory, the thought slithered through the air like smoke. What would he do next? How far would he go? And how many would follow him still, driven not by truth, but by the poison of rage? The nation was divided. Half cheered Jasmine as the warrior of justice. Half seethed, clinging to Trump as a martyr cut down by the establishment. The hearing had ended, but the battle had not. This was only the prologue to something larger, darker, more unpredictable. Jasmine looked out across the ocean of faces, the chants vibrating the very ground beneath her feet. She raised her voice one last time, steady, fierce, and unbreakable. This is not just my fight, it is our fight, and together we will not back down. Not today, not ever. Honey. The crowd answered with a roar so deafening it shook the Capitol steps. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters scribbled furiously. Millions watched from screens across the country, their hearts pounding in unison. The world had witnessed the collapse of a titan and the rise of a new force. But as night fell over Washington, the echoes of Trump's final threat lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Because though Jasmine had won this battle, everyone knew the war was far from over. This was not the end. It was the spark before the fire, the calm before the chaos, the closing of one chapter and the dangerous opening of the next. The words etched themselves into the air, unspoken but undeniable. This is not the final act. In the clash of power and pride, the world was reminded of a truth far older than politics. Lies may roar, but truth endures. Jasmine's stand was not about one victory over one man. It was about the courage to speak when silence feels safer, to rise when the weight of a nation presses down. And perhaps the lesson is this: no matter how loud deceit may thunder, it will always crumble before the quiet, relentless strength of justice and integrity. If this story shook you, don't look away. Sit with it. Talk about it. Pass it to someone who still believes justice is worth the fight. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where truth doesn't whisper, it roars. Hit the bell, because the next battle won't be quiet. It will be fierce, and it may just change how you see justice, power, and courage. This tale is a dramatization, born from echoes of real injustice in the spirit of those who dare to resist. Any resemblance to real people or events is symbolic, meant for reflection, for critique, for dialogue. Thank you for watching. Because justice is never given freely, it's seized by those who refuse to bow. This is Harrison Stories.